The Mother series is one of Nintendo's weirdest franchises. And not in terms of theming. Don't get me wrong, the theming is very weird, okay? It's weird in the sense that it's considered a primary series in Nintendo's library, but they don't ever like mentioning it. I mean, Masahiro Sakurai deemed the series important enough to add Ness and the other one into Smash Bros. The former even dates all the way back to the first release of the series in 1999. This is where most people found out about the series, myself included. Ness has been my main since 2011. You just gotta wait for them to get close enough then. And that's why I made Ness. The baseball bat never fails, baby.
Got a question for you.
But before we get into Earthbound, we gotta explain the rest of the Mother series, is what I would be saying if I actually played the first Mother game. But to summarize, Chikasato Itoi had the idea of an RPG set in modern times and pitched it to Nintendo. He was expecting an on-the-spot yes, but he ended up getting a we'll consider it. Mother released in 1989 to success in Japan. Translation for Western audiences began work and was mostly completed in 1991. However, it was cancelled as the Super Nintendo recently came out and Nintendo of America decided to wait for Mother 2 to be released. It took 26 years for the original Mother to be released in North America when it released in 2015 along with the re-release of the sequel. Personally, I think waiting for the Super Nintendo was a better choice than releasing the original game because in my opinion, this is where Itoi's vision of an RPG set in modern times really got to be fulfilled, and thus, 4 years later, Earthbound was released. Yeah, this game was a massive flop. The failure of Earthbound is infamous, and it's very easy to see just by looking up the prices of an original Super Nintendo copy. Authentic copies go for upwards of $500. It got to the point where there are websites designed to track the average prices of the game to make sure you weren't getting ripped off. Looking at this marketing that was released here in the US, yeah, this makes sense. For some reason, Nintendo decided to use enemies like Master Belch to advertise this game using classic slogans like, "This game stinks." In all of the Nintendo Power advertising, some kind of terrible smell was mentioned, whether it be the characters, the enemies, or even the game box itself. Nintendo used words such as putrid and repulsive to try and show this idea without any sort of self-awareness on how putting this on a magazine would make it sound terrible. And the commercials didn't show anything that made this game stand out from any other game on the market, which is strange because this game stands out in every way. Wait, so this game failed because Nintendo doubled down on advertising to young children by using corny jokes that alienated potential adults who wouldn't want to try it out? I guess some things never change, huh? Because of its rarity and the charming execution, it's become the very definition of a cult classic. But enough backstory, onto the actual game. The game begins with a camera pan over on it, a town in Eagleland, which is an obvious parody of America. A meteor crashes on a mountain and 13-year-old boy named Ness goes to check it out. He runs into the annoying neighbor kid, Pokey, and he's told to go home. Later in the night, Pokey goes to Ness's house to tell him to go find his brother. They go back towards the meteor and find Pokey's brother before hearing buzzing near the meteor. They check out the meteor and Ness finds a bee from the future named Buzz, who explains that in the future, an evil force named Gygus has destroyed the world and that a group of people called the Chosen Four will unite and defeat him. While taking Pokey and his brother back home, one of Gygus' minions come to attack the group before Buzz fights them off. Pokey then proceeds to get beaten by his dad before Buzz dies and gives Ness a stone and tells him to visit all the 8 sanctuaries across the world. And this is kind of where the plot just drops off. This is because, well, unlike most RPGs, it's less about the overarching plot and more about what happens during the journey to reach Gygus. All you really need to know about this game is that it starts with a small town boy waking up in the middle of the night and ends with you killing alien Satan. There are a ton of parts in this game that will stick with you for months or even years after playing it. It's really just about the places you go and the characters you meet along the way. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Most of the story is outright told to you by either Pokey, who got completely corrupted by the power of Gygus, or through the parts where the Mr. Saturns give you a fuck ton of LSD and you trip out for a few minutes while the voice of God talks to you. The combat system is a pretty by-the-numbers RPG system. You have 4 party members and attacks go in the order from fastest to slowest with the ability to use spells and items. And this honestly works to the game's advantage because there are no mechanics to overcomplicate things and each hit feels satisfying because of the sound effects. The only real thing separating Earthbound's combat system from other RPGs is the ticking HP mechanic. When a party member takes damage, rather than waiting for the HP to fall before the next action takes place, the HP slowly ticks down until it reaches the number it's supposed to be at. This promotes quick thinking because you can heal the party member during this period and prevent them from dying as long as they get healed before the next action when they hit 0. Opposed to the original Mother's continuous random encounters, Earthbound completely forgoes that system. Instead, you can see all the enemies in the overworld, making it so you can avoid basically any battle you don't want to fight. Extending on this, when you do run into an encounter, any enemy in the area will try and run to you and join the battle, leading to you fighting more enemies. This goes up to 6 enemies in one battle. And the best part, even though a lot of the enemies are avoidable, Earthbound requires no grinding to beat. Well, that's not entirely true. To beat Frank and on it, you need to be around level 8, but after that, as long as you don't run away from any battles, you'll be a high enough level for everything. And I'll take only one battle of grinding over needing to grind for almost every boss because they have far too much health compared to you. And though a game is a lot more than the sum of its parts, and this isn't the only thing that makes the game fun, it's the party members that make the combat interesting. Introducing the Chosen 4! The prophecy foretells that 4 people, 3 boys and 1 girl, will join together and defeat Gygas. These people are Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh. And they are the primary party members that you use in all this game's combat. Even though he's the leader of the bunch and you know him well, Ness is probably the most boring of the 4. He's physically the strongest of the cast and uses a baseball bat as his weapon, which is the coolest weapon in the game. He has the most amount of health of the party, and he has his signature PK Rockin' as his only PSI damage dealer. But he moves the slowest, so he's basically going last every turn. And even though he has the best healing PSI in the game, sometimes you aren't going to be able to heal your party members before they die because of how slow he is. Not to mention how much PP PK Rockin' uses. But then he gets a Magicant where all of Ness's weaknesses get removed and he becomes the second fastest member of the party with 600 PP and even more health. But even with that, he's generally pretty boring because he doesn't do all that much interesting. Unlike Pooh. While having the funniest name for the 6-year-olds this game isn't even marketed for anymore, is still pretty mediocre because he feels like he's trying to do too much at once. I think his backstory is pretty cool though. Pooh is a prince who completes his training in honestly one of the weirdest scenes in the game, who then gets told about the prophecy and how he must join Ness, Paula, and Jeff as the final member of the Chosen 4. Combat is kinda where he takes a turn for the worse though. He takes a lot of his PK attacks from Paula, but he's limited in the fact that he can't unlock the Omega forms of them. Not to mention, he has significantly less PP than both Paula and Ness, so he's even limited in that regard. He actually learns his Life Up and Healing PSI before Ness, with the exception of Life Up Omega, because of course he doesn't. But because of his support abilities, he's really just there to revive some of the stronger party members, if they go down. That all being said though, Pooh is still probably more interesting than Ness, specifically because it feels like there's more experimentation going on with him. Pooh is supposed to be based on an ancient Chinese prince, and because of that, he gets things to separate him from the rest of the cast who are from America. He regains PP just by drinking water, so while he doesn't have a large max capacity, he can restore it easily. Pooh also doesn't get as much health back from average Western food, so you gotta find him some food from places like Dalam or Summers. And in battles, he has an ability called Mirror, or as I like to call it, Pooh failed to turn into the nuclear reactor robot, because it never fucking works. In the scenarios where it does work, which it won't, it lets Pooh transform into an enemy where you lose control of him and an AI takes over. And no, I'm sorry to say, Pooh can't turn into Gygas. He also has PK Starstorm, which is actually really handy for wiping out enemies you don't feel like fighting. Or when you're fighting bosses, like the time Jeff fired a bottle rocket at Master Belch, then Pooh dropped from the sky casting a Starstorm and just fucking killed him. Jeff is, among other things I shouldn't mention in a YouTube video, the party's primary boss killer. He's the son of an esteemed inventor who came to help Ness and Paula out upon being telepathically contacted by Paula in what's easily my favorite scene in the game. I just love Paula, and seeing the message she sends to Jeff to rescue them from the basement of a hotel is so cool. Following in the footsteps of his father, Dr. Endonauts, Jeff can repair broken objects to use in battle while resting. This would be a pretty cool feature if it didn't take up so much space in his inventory, which as you'll see later, is really important, especially for Jeff. You can't throw away or sell the broken items, but when they do get repaired, they function as basically extra weapons. Of the ones I got in this playthrough, the 2 most useful to me are the Heavy Bazooka, because it deals more damage than all of Jeff's weapons, and the HP Sucker, which is pretty self-explanatory. None of that is why Jeff is so great though. Jeff has the highest single target damage output in the entire Mother series, bar none. Jeff can buy bottle rockets which decimate any enemy you use it on. They have a limited supply because it's based on the amount in Jeff's inventory, so they're primarily used on bosses, and they can basically make it possible to kill bosses in one turn. You can get some more from random merchants throughout the game, because rather than getting his weapons from the drugstore like the other characters, Jeff gets his weapons from the friendly neighborhood arms dealer. I don't know why I mentioned that, I just really wanted to bring up the fact that Summers doesn't have an arms dealer in it, but Scaraba, the place based on a desert, does. Now, I'd say something like, Watsy destroys Pokey, But when I tried to do so, I learned that Pokey has some armor against bottle rockets, so he takes far less damage. Can't win them all. What a waste of 20 grand. And then we have my favorite member of the Chosen Four, the one who single-handedly wins most of the fights throughout the entire game. The #1 contender for the Best Girl Awards. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Paula! Paula is easily the strongest character in any RPG I've ever played. If Ness is the PSI powerhouse, Paula is the PSI nuclear plant. If you want an idea of how strong she is, take the strongest character in a game you've played, then make them faster than all the other characters. Yeah, that's Paula. Why is Paula so strong? She is the strongest PSI in the game, with access to the Omega forms of all offensive PSI attacks, with enough PP to cast something every turn. She also has the most stylish way to kill a boss in any game I've ever seen.
So you have chosen death.
You might be wondering why the quality got so bad there, and that's because I wasn't a high enough level to have PSI Shield Omega. Oh my god! Some people might respond to this by saying, well, Jeff might be better if you know how to use them. But I disagree, because even if you know how to use them, Paula has something Jeff lacks. Consistency. Yes, Jeff can do anywhere from 600 to 2,000 damage every dozen or so battles. But Paula does 500 damage on every turn, making it so she can win basically every fight on her own. You could argue that Kumatora from Mother 3 is better just because she has Starstorm and all the healing abilities, but Mother 3 sucks and all the enemies have way too much health at basically every point of the game. You may say I'm a fool for believing the way that I do, but tell me, who summons Jeff to rescue the party in Threed? Paula. Who's the only one who can learn the Omega forms to the basic PSI attacks? Paula. Who gets the killing blow on Gigas? That's right, it's my wonderful viewers who motivate me to do what I do every day. You all are just as important as the Chosen Four in the Earthbound story. Thanks a lot, guys. And even ignoring all that, you just gotta admit how adorable she is. Her main armor type for the head is a ribbon, which is the cutest goddamn thing ever. You know, I don't think Paula is the right name for her. That's better. I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to demote whoever wrote this from a legend to the Game Over theme is called A Bad Dream, and if it doesn't play at my funeral, let's just say, I'm not fucking going. Earthbound's soundtrack is the epitome of knowing the song but not knowing the names. If any of it sounds familiar, it probably is. The Sanctuary Guardian theme was used a lot as a meme format. Apple Kids theme was used as epic Derp XD music back in 2015 Nintendo YouTube. And honestly, I don't blame people for using the soundtrack of this game. The Mother series as a whole has incredible music in it, and it just kept improving across all three of the games. While Mother 3 does better in this aspect, and believe me, that's going to be one of the 2 times you're ever going to hear me say that, Earthbound's soundtrack is still pretty great. One of my favorite songs from this game's soundtrack is Pokey Means Business. The transition from standard 8-bit music to full-on metal is unexpected, and it works so perfectly. There are weirder songs in the soundtrack too, like for example, here's Geix's fight theme in his second phase. Doesn't sound that rhythmic, but apparently there's enough of a beat to it for there to be an OC map of it, and upon playing it, it's certainly an OC map. I guess this song fits with the background though. I could say the same about the rest of the soundtrack too. The music fits every town in the game. I love nearly all the towns in this game, and the art style really carries it. They all have their own distinct art style. I could show you On It and Foresight, and you can tell how different they look. My personal favorite town in the game is Summers. It's such a beautiful town with some great quaint music in the background. The setting of this game as a whole is really unique. You're just a kid in an everyday world, and a lot of typical RPG locations are changed to fit this. Like, rather than going to a basic shop for healing items like potions, you go to restaurants and buy food like hamburgers and pizza. Instead of looking for chests for items, you look for presents. One of the roadblocks in this game is a tunnel full of ghosts that get scared away by loud music. So you get a group of jazz musicians out of debt and they drive you past the ghost after their final show. All of the enemy designs in this series are consistently amazing. Every new area you go to, you get to see all the weird enemies. These guys range from living taxis, Humberto Hernandez's assassin, haunted tents, zombie dogs, gang members that look like BDSM playmates, a die that constantly spawns more enemies and extremely goddamn annoying to fight, and my personal favorite, a literal pair of lips called the Kiss of Death. It has a move called the Kiss of Death that poisons you. So the action box just says, the Kiss of Death gave the Kiss of Death, which makes it even better. This isn't even mentioning the entire section where you literally fight the KKK. And before some random person tries to correct me, look at this and try to tell me it isn't a fucking KKK member. You fight the leader of them at the end, and the battle is clearly taking a toll on his mind until he finally fires one more thunderbolt at you with the knowledge that the Franklin badge is going to deflect it, thus killing himself. Exploring the towns is pretty open, but there's really only one way to go, so you usually just have to walk around until some random NPC says what to do, but for some things, it's not explained at all. This can occasionally lead to you getting lost when you don't know where to get the pencil eraser, for example. For these situations, there's an in-game hint system which tells you where to go if you get lost, which is pretty useful. Throughout the entire game, you're gonna get a ton of items, but one of the primary issues with this game rears its head in really quickly. The inventory system is really limited. There is no separation between your battle, equipable, and key items. Equipables alone take up 4 spaces in every character's inventory, except I guess for Pooh because you get his items gradually. For obvious reasons, you can't throw away key items even after they aren't necessary anymore, but this means that they're taking up even more space in the inventory, because even if you deposit them through the Escargot Express, you don't know when you'll need them again. You are going to run out of space at one point or another, and when you do, you're probably going to need to throw something away because it could be a weapon upgrade, or it could be like the jar of fly honey where it's used twice in the entire game and can't be thrown away. The limited inventory space creates the unintentional byproduct of healing items being completely useless. You can use recovery PSI outside of battles, meaning you always have a way to heal. So what's the point of healing items? I guess if you're out of PP, but if you're out of PP, you're probably going to lose the next battle anyway. There's an entire mechanic of using condiments to get more health when using a healing item, but that's just completely ruined because condiments take up even more space, making them more pointless than before. And as I mentioned, every character has their own inventory. If you want a specific character to grab an item when you open a precedent, just make sure their inventory is clear and the characters in front of them have full inventory. If not, you can just pass the item to the person you want to hold it. There's a lot of passing around items in this game because a character can only equip an item if it's in their inventory, and as long as they have one clear space in your inventory when buying items, it's fine. And that's because of this game's greatest innovation to the RPG genre. Whenever you buy an equipable item, the game asks you if you want to sell the old one. This is a huge time save as you don't have to go back into a sell menu to get rid of the item. Not that going into a sell menu is a bad thing, because all of it's done on one screen. When you press A, rather than directly interacting with the thing in front of you, a menu opens up with options of what to do. It's a bit awkward to get used to at first, but it's not that bad, because to me, it sort of gave the illusion of being able to do more with certain people. And I didn't notice it, so it's probably a good thing. It doesn't completely feel like pausing the entire game so you can move your items to different characters. Granted, I would have preferred if you didn't have to do that at all, but at least you aren't brought to a complete halt. Sorry, I got the taste of a shitty game in my throat. But there's one section of this game that brings together every terrible aspect of this game and puts it all in one 3-hour dumpster fire. A town so bad it single-handedly killed all of my enthusiasm for playing this game on my first time. A city that uses its weight in the story to make you think that it's better than it actually is, while not making any efforts to make the game fun. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Foresight. Foresight is the worst. Whenever I go to sleep pissed off, I hang up a picture of Foresight on my wall, so when I wake up I can get angry all over again. You first enter Foresight after going through the Dusty Dunes desert and go onto a bridge leading you to a town which actually looks really nice. I've always been a fan of the whole big city aesthetic, but then all of that enthusiasm dies once you actually have to do the story parts. While walking around, you learn that the drugstore is closed and that the Runaway Five is in town and back in debt. Talking to the NPCs, they mention that there's a gold miner in the desert. I gave a guy next to the mine some food already, so I can just run there, rest, and start the dungeon. Welcome to the shittiest designed dungeon in any game. The goal of this dungeon is simple. Find the 5 mole guardians that all think they're the 3rd best of their group. The problem is that this dungeon is the hardest to navigate in the game. There are multiple branching routes and all of them lead to a guardian. But then some of them are on a different floor for some reason, and there are ladders to go down a floor that don't even lead to a guardian just for the hell of it. If it was just this, it wouldn't be that bad, but it gets way worse. There are so many encounters in here, and nearly all of them are the same enemies that go down the exact same way. You fight the exact same poisonous snake like 50 fucking times in this entire dungeon. The snake that literally goes down by doing the exact same thing every turn. It's all just using Paula to use PK Freeze Beta and using Nest to bash. That's all it is. It's all just freeze, bash, freeze, bash. Maybe just freeze if you really feel like it. But if I have to hear another fucking done, These are also the snakes that just decide to poison your party members, so after every fight, you're losing a minimum of 10 PP just curing the poison. It's not just the snakes either. There's the admittedly hilarious Noosemen, who just decide to be immune to PK Rockin' when they feel like it. They aren't as bad as the snakes, but given the aforementioned enemies in the overworld joining the battle, and the gold mine's very narrow walls, means you're going to be fighting a lot of them in battle, and they don't have any real PSI vulnerabilities, so you just gotta use PK Fire and hope for the best. Whoops! Looks like you got your head handed to you by the poison you couldn't heal off because you ran out of PP healing yourself the other 20 times you got poisoned. Must have been a bad dream, huh? Well, unfortunately for you, your suffering isn't over yet, so looks like you gotta wake back up. Now that you got a game over, all the party members except for Ness are dead, and there's no hospital near you because that's just too forgiving. So now you gotta run back to Foresight, use the hospital, run back to the mines, use the free resting spot to restore Ness's PP, then you can finally go back to playing this god-awful dungeon. Once you beat the last couple Guardians, you can finally leave this never-ending hell pit and get the diamond on your way back to Foresight, unless you don't have space, in which you gotta run back to the mines and get them from the hotel after throwing something away. Now you might be thinking, boy, that sure was tedious. Can I go back to the fun part? Nope, you've still got another section to go through. And this time, your strongest damage dealer gets taken away for the next hour.
Wait. You can't be as bad as the mines, though, can it? Can it?
Surprisingly, it isn't. The department store gets reopened, and in there you can find an arms dealer to buy some bottle rockets for Jeff, which makes the entire part way easier. Once you try and leave the department store, though, Paula gets kidnapped and you have to go all the way back to the top floor. It's also in this story where you fight the worst enemy in gaming history, a literal coffee cup. It doesn't have that much health, but you encounter it before Magicant, and every turn it does 50 damage to the entire party. And sometimes, you just miss your attacks and end up giving it another turn. The boss to the top isn't hard to fight if you actually brought bottle rockets. But when you beat him, he tells you to go to the cafe, and that's where the mayor who went missing went. Pookie basically became the president while this was going on, by the way. You can talk to him in the Monotoli building where he gets the security to throw you out. But once you get to the cafe, you hear a rendition of the Star Spangled Banner for some reason. Before you inspect the front counter and then get teleported to a trippy variation of Foresight. This is Moonside, and again, I really like the aesthetic of it. The music in it just feels really surreal. And this includes the music that plays when you use the hotel. And all the enemy designs feel like hallucinations more than before. I mean, you're literally fighting abstract art in this entire section. Dialect prompts are also switched now, meaning yes means no and no means yes, which is a pretty funny idea. But just like its normal counterpart, it's the gameplay in Moonside that makes it really boring. Moonside is full of invisible barriers, and the only way to get to the boss of the area is talking to certain NPCs that throw you around the town. So you just have to walk around until you find the right NPC who throws you to the right place. Once you do actually find the right place, an invisible character follows you around so you can fight the Mani Mani statue, which is the statue that Poki's been using to corrupt all the major bosses with the power of Gygus. The statue paralyzes your party members, which at this point just consists of Ness and Jeff because Paula got kidnapped. When you get paralyzed, you can't use your basic attacks and you can only use PSI and items, but the boss goes down really easily if you have a bottle rocket. If not, good luck. Fun fact, Jeff died on my first playthrough of this game, and because I'm a fucking moron, I completely forgot about the flip yes and no prompt, so I couldn't get him out of the hospital. After beating the boss, Ness and Jeff wake up in the back room of the cafe with a broken Mani Mani statue that forced them into Moonside in the first place. They leave the cafe and find Everdread unconscious on the floor. After paying this jackass some food to let someone see their dying friend, he explains how the Mani Mani statue works, and then dies. Or it just walks off the screen through the building since this is a children's game. Then an Apple Kid calls about a machine that can only make salmon ice cream before an addict runs up and asks for it. The delivery person mentions that he dropped the machine in the desert. Yep, we're going back there now. I can see the headlines already. Local teenagers wipe out endangered species. In the desert, you find a cave full of monkeys that finally gets opened up after Moonside. Here, you have to give a bunch of monkeys items you may or may not have to get to the end. Let me just summarize this section for you real quick. Buy a skip sandwich from the drugstore. Go into the caves and give the monkeys items you already have. Run into a monkey that asks for a ruler. Realize you don't have one. Go back to Foresight. Learn that the department store doesn't even sell rulers. Buy a picnic lunch on your way out. Run back to the cave. Realize that the items in the chest are items that different monkeys ask for. Find a ruler. Give the ruler to the monkey. Realize that it didn't even lead to the end of the tunnel. Then finally get to the end of the tunnel and have the monkey teach you PSI teleport so you can get out of Foresight faster. Once you get through all of that, you can go back to the Monotoli building, and the terrible pacing still doesn't stop. Here's just one encounter in this entire section. Didn't that feel like it took way too long for something pointless? It would be okay if that only happened once, but it happened to me 5 times. 5 times waiting for that. And after all of that, you fight the final boss of the entire Foresight saga, a tiny robot that really likes healing itself and making children cry. And then, in one of the funniest moments of the game, the Runaway 5 comes in and just turns off the robot you were fighting. They then say that Monotoli is in the room next door, and when you go through, Paula says that Monotoli isn't as bad as he seemed. Monotoli explains that he was corrupted by the power of the Mani Mani statue and tells the party that Pokey was trying to stop them from going to Summers and learning about the pyramid. After Paula rejoins the party with a great sound effect, Monotoli lets the party use his helicopter to fly to Summers. When they get to the helipad, Pokey steals the helicopter and taunts the party saying they'll never get to Summers. And finally, Paula has a vision that they need to go back to Threed and use the Skyrunner to get to Summers. With the help of the Runaway 5, they leave Foresight and you're finally done with the worst part of the game. There's no place to go but up, and thankfully, Summers ended up being my favorite town in the entire game. Foresight was only halfway through, but at least it gets way better after all of that. The rest of the story is pretty inconsequential until the end though, but the ending has some relevance to the plot of Mother 3. To reach Gygus, the party needs to go to the past and through another dimension. The Phase Distorter, which is a machine created by Applekin and Dr. Endonuts to move someone to anywhere in space and time, kills any organic life form that uses it. Thus, the party must put their souls into robots to use the Phase Distorter and kill Gygus once and for all. Side note, I find the progression of Applekin's inventions throughout the game hilarious. Like he goes from, here's a device that erases pencils, to, I made an ice cream machine that only makes salmon ice cream, to lastly, yes, this is a device that can transport someone to any point in space and time that obliterates any life form in it. Once the party gets to Gygus, Pokey appears in a mech explaining that they're in a machine that's the one thing holding Gygus back. Pokey then tries to defeat the party on his own before retreating and unleashing Gygus while calling him an almighty idiot. I already mentioned the music, but the background is just this. The first phase of the boss is mostly just a regular boss, but phase 2 is pretty different. Gygus can't die in a second phase by regular means. Paula has to pray for everyone else in the present to help them, giving us the game's true lesson of, if you can't beat up the physical manifestation of all evil, religion can. Truly, a message we all needed to hear. With the help of 7 different supporting characters and a 4th wall break later, Gygus dies along with the robot bodies of the Chosen 4. However, Pokey runs away from the battle, stating that he will get his revenge on Ness. This means that he's still alive, even though he's in another dimension in the past. The war against Gygus is finally over. And after the Chosen 4's souls return to Saturn Valley, not really sure how, but alright, the gang gives their goodbyes when Paula asks Ness to take her home. After deciding not to do that and taking Paula to his house, Ness's mom says that the photographer dropped off a scrapbook of all the photos taken across the game. The game then ends with the cast credits of all the characters in the game, with the Runaway 5 playing over it. The end. And despite all that slow-paced garbage in the middle of it, Earthbound is still an incredible game. It's a game that will always stick with me no matter how much time passes since I last played it. It's easily one of the most charming games I've ever played, and it's well deserving of its cult classic status. But this wasn't the end of the Mother series. The next game released 12 years later in Japan and Japan only, following the failure of Mother 2 in the West. Tune in next time where I try and see if Mother 3 is a better game than Earthbound. I'm sorry, I just can't say that without laughing.